Hey guys, Loma02. I'll be doing a closeout post-mortem on Suicide Black. I actually ran it to second place in MTGO month-end event in the top 8. So I'm pretty happy with where this deck's gotten. I still do think that the deck as a whole has some liabilities, but I think it's been able to showcase and actually be a pretty edifying experience for me as a deck builder on what's relevant in aggressive strategies in the Canadian Highlander and just generally 100-card singleton formats. So before I go any further, this is going to be not a hugely lengthy, but a more lengthy kind of deck tech / theory of play / theory piece, followed up by gameplay. So if you are only interested in gameplay, please go ahead and hit pause, go down to the comments, and find the timestamps for different matchups that I've played with this deck since the last release I've had on it. Alright, that said, I've got the deck broken down a little bit differently, and I debated how I wanted to do this because there's a lot of inter-deck synergies that you really wouldn't see as synergies in a deck like this because most of the cards just seem like aggressively costed creatures, and they are, that don't have a ton of synergy. And I wouldn't say they per se have a ton of like inter-card synergy, but in regards to the effects that I want to have as a density of the entire deck, there are a lot of interwoven synergies and effects that I have at a very high rate, so I can consistently expect to see those effects and or those types of cards, basically those cards that replace each other. And when I say that, I mean like, Painseer is Dark Confidant, is Blood Scrivenger, is a Silent Visitor, is Rune Raider. Now, they're not all equal cards. They have different mana requirements for some of them. Some of them take longer than other cards to get into play. Some of them are slower to draw you cards. That all said, and Glintsleeve Siphoner, I guess, could go into that list as well. That all said, what I'm saying is, if I get like one of those effects, I can generally find a way to make it work in a way that it provides me like card advantage, right? In this case, if we're talking about the Bobs. Another thing I found, going through is that one of the most important things about a deck like this is consistency of mana, which seems like it may be something that's inconsistent, and actually it is one of the factors that led to my loss in the finals, is consistency of mana, coupled with some pretty harsh mulligans, but I mean, that's kind of a similar thing. Oftentimes, on this deck specifically, you'd rather keep a 2 to 3 land hand, with a little bit less gas than like just a full gas hand with one land. I mean, you will keep one landers with this deck, you have to. Because of how it's built and what it's trying to do, but you'd actually rather have like a 2 to 3 lander, right? Now, the likelihood of that's pretty low in a 24 land deck. 2 of the lands are Ancient Tomb and City of Traders, which are not good solo lands in your hand, but the deck has been built in a way that it can really power out very strongly with them. And even some of its threats are just pure colorless, like Winter Orb, Ankh, Porcelain Legionnaire, Scrap Heap Scrounger, etc. That are enabled by those. But it kind of goes into this latest build that I have, the one that I took through top 8, being actually what I would call a schmedium deck. So there's typical aggressive, like red deck win style decks, white weenie decks, that are tending on just going 1, 2, 3 drop. They're the medium variants of decks now that intend on using Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Ancient Tomb, City of Traders, and effects like that to power out powerful 4 and 5 drops. Generally, their curve, if they have ideal openers, is going to be 3, 4, 5. Whereas this deck's kind of hedging between both because it wants the higher consistency of an aggressive deck that just goes 1, 2, 3, but it wants to have ounce to having nut draws where it goes, 3, 1, 1, 1, 1, or 3, 2, 1, on the next turn, because it's really banking a lot on its higher end 3 drops. That said, the deck also does have decent ounce now to using 4 mana effectively with cards like Pitiless Horde and Mardu Strike Leader, both of which, if you want to dash out, are actually pretty powerful. It makes you a little more immune to shock. It's also kind of a surprise. Like, Pitiless Horde is a Lava Axe. If you just dash it out and they're not expecting it, you just hit them with it. That said, the deck's gone under significant revision, and the biggest thing I found is I wanted to have consistency of mana. So one of the biggest adds to the deck that I think has fundamentally changed the way that this deck runs is Demonic Consultation. Let me get the card preview window out, guys. Demonic not this one. This one, Moto. Demonic Consultation, if you're not familiar with the card, says choose a card name, exile the top 6 cards of your library, then reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal that card, exiling all of them along the way. And once you find that card, you put it in your hand and exile everything else that was above it on the deck. So basically, this card, seemed like people are like, oh, it's pure cowboy magic, it's just dumb. Okay, yes, you can lose the game with this card. Like, you can literally, and typically what you're naming with this is Black Lotus. Like, this is typically a turn 1 play, and it's basically, if you're playing this turn 1, Black Lotus is essentially becoming your second Dark Ritual. Or you can play it turn 1 for Black Lotus and go turn 2 Lotus, into multiple drops, depending on the consistency of your hand. Because you don't generally want to burn mana off. Like, if you just use Lotus to cast a 2-drop, it's really bad. If you get to cast 2 cards with it, you're good to go. Like, you'll do it on turn 1 with a 2 and a 1 in hand, and then if you have a second land, great, you can start playing more 1s out, some 2s out. And you could even, like, in right matchup, just Black Lotus into a 3-drop. And I've done that against, like, green decks and stuff like that, where, like, their likelihood of wanting to block with their early drops is really low. And whatever I play is generally going to be, like, a 4 or 5 power thing, and it's going to force them to basically, be playing against the Abyss for the remainder of the game, while actually also actively winning the game with damage. But Demonic Consultation, like, very much so, I think people, like, are like, oh, this is just stupid, like, this card's dumb, you could just lose the game if you cast it. Yeah, you can, but there's a significant number of games that you just lose, period, because you don't draw the support you need to. You don't draw the lands that you need to draw in order to cast your spells. Maybe you keep a double cantrip 2-land hand on a control deck, and, you double bottom on both scry effects off your cantrips, and you just miss your 3rd land. Or maybe you brainstorm into 3-4 drops while you're stuck on 3 lands, and you have to put a bunch of cards that you can't really cast or are not effective on top of your deck. And, you're going to have 2 more draw steps of not drawing lands and having relevant board impact. Those are games you can also just lose to variance, right? And I think that, folks look at this card, and because it is so obvious, like, how you lose to this card, they just kind of relegate it to being unplayable or to being bad. And I really don't think it is, because if you kind of do the math behind it, like, there is probably, like, a legitimate 6 to 7% chance that you die to Demonic Consultation in your opener. Probably less. So, like, this deck can kill in 3 turns. With Black Lotus, it can kill in 3 turns. It fishes typically around 4 turns, but it can kill in 3 turns. They actually kill in 2 turns with Lotus, but it requires a very specific hand. But it'll typically kill in 3 turns with a turn 1 Lotus. So unless you Demonic Consultation and mill over the Black Lotus in your top 6, or the Black Lotus is in the bottom 2 cards of your deck, your chances of winning the game probably go up by about 35 to 45%. Some matchups, it's almost a statistical lock. If it's against control and they can't counter the Black Lotus when it comes out, they're probably just going to lose unless they have a lot of good red cards. But even at that point, like, white cards like Wrath of Gods are probably not going to be fast enough to actually stop you, because you just get too much of an early board advantage and too much pressure for them to actually, stop you from deploying, 3 threats turn 1, or, 2 relevant threats turn 1, or just 1 big one. One big one being less desirable against white cards because, Swords of Plowshare's Path to Exile. That said, this has been a really big ad for me, and I think it's actually really increased the deck's consistency. Outside of playing, like, a combo deck like Storm that has, like, Demonic Tutor, Imperial... Storm generally has Demonic Tutor plus Lotus. I think, honestly, even more so than Storm, this is probably the deck in the format that has the highest consistency of having a turn 1 Black Lotus. And the reason I say that is because if you have Swamp Demonic Consultation, you have Black Lotus, unless you just kill yourself with it, in the 6% chance that you do. Or you just open on Black Lotus. That said, you also have Dark Ritual, which, under Consultation, if you're consulting for the Lotus, basically the consult became Dark Ritual at that point, is what it ended up becoming. That said, you have a very high chance of having a turn 1 Lotus-like effect, or at least a verisimilitude of a Lotus effect, on turn 1 in this deck, with basically 3 cards, and you even have possibilities of, like, Mox, Lotus Petal draws as well with Swamp, and then it's fairly similar effect. So the deck's mana is actually really, really relevant to it. I think it's actually the most important aspect of how this style of deck works. And the reason I say that is because the card quality in black aggressive decks, really this is Suicide Black. Like, I think there's a lot of black aggressive decks, there's a lot of black mid-range decks, or that are more mid-rangey, that are probably more match-neutral decks, but are less consistently powerful. They probably have better game against a lot of things. They're probably less of a 70-30 deck, which is what I would consider this deck, but I think on the whole they're going to be less powerful because of how our points are spread in this list, and because of the high probability and the many outs we have to drawing mana acceleration very early in the game, with pretty good consistency. That said, a lot of the deck is built around having a light mana base that is capable of rapidly expanding on turns 1 through 2, and then riding out early board advantage to victory by turn 3 to 4. The deck is very mana light, but it can produce a ton of mana early through the Lotus spread and Mox spread. And a lot of its threats, have a lot of different capabilities that I think interwoven together, the synergies of them make the deck fairly resilient to combination and combination control decks. This first pile that I'm highlighting right here, I'm not going to go card by card because a lot of these have not changed, but you have a bunch of recursive threats. The recursive threats tend to be very challenging for like the Wrath of God style decks, or like the decks that are going to have to trade with you in combat to beat, because you can play a longer attritional game, and as the game goes longer, you'll draw into more lands, and a lot of these don't take a ton of mana to bring back. And because you're rapidly expanding onto the board, if you do happen to lose key components on the board, and some of them are these creatures, you just bring them back for pretty much free. I mean, some of them are literally free. Like Bloodghast, just play a land, get it back for free. Graveyard Marshal, not quite the same as the rest of these cards, but basically it works with cards that you have lost that do not come back. This next pile is just the pure aggressive threats. These cards are just threats. One interesting thing about this pile is that Gnarled Scarhide actually has become a lot more alive as a bestow creature. The reason that's relevant is because you could use this as essentially a fog effect on one of your opponent's creatures if you want to enchant one of your opponent's creatures with it, because it says that creature that's enchanted cannot block. Another cool thing about this card is being able to enchant it on a flyer or an evasive Shadow Weenie is really strong. Now that's if you open on this card, unless you have multiple 2 or 1 drops that you can play. You're still going to play it on 1, but if if the funnel of your mana does not require you to play it on turn 1, you can generally save it for equity. And the reason I think that it gets there a lot more often is, one, we've gone up by 2 lands in this deck, and we're playing Ancient Tomb and City of Traders now. So with two extra lands, and 2 of them, the 2 lands that we put in, making 2 mana, the likelihood of Gnarled Scarhide being able to be used as an enchantment has actually come up quite a bit more often to be bestowed. Ice-Hide Golems in this list, I really think this card's great. Playing all snow basics now, and this is better than a lot of the one mana spells that I had been playing in this deck. And yeah, I mean, outside of some of the evasive stuff like Shadow Alley Denizen, which this does not work with, I just think in general this is just a better card. And this replaced Death Shadow. Death Shadow is an all-around more powerful card, but it's a much less consistent card. So I decided to replace it because I think one of the important things in this deck is that all of its cards at least enact the primary game plan of the deck. And I found that I was just putting Death Shadow under Chrome Boxes, I was discarding it to Collective Brutalities. I was, that kind of stuff. I was pitching it, or I was using it as burn with Soul Spike, stuff like that pretty often. Or I was just casting it to get a creature in the yard so I could bring back a recursive creature that required me to exile creatures. It just wasn't all that often that reliable to actually have it as a literal 1-drop in my deck that I could cast and just do what I wanted a 1-drop to do. So this next pile is really the only pure beater in the 2-drop pile. All the other 2-drops do something that's kind of a little more specific, and even this card kind of does. This is Death Touch Lifelinker. Got great stats for 2 mana. It's basically, what do they call this? The Vampire Newhawk. A lot of my 2-drops actually are over in the evasion pile. My 2-drop creatures. Evasion is really important and is one of the key things that I decided I wanted to identify my 2-drops, either evasion or card draw. And even Gifted Aetherborn kind of has evasion because oftentimes folks do not want to block this. It just eats stuff. It eats much better cards than itself. But it doesn't technically have evasion, so it's kind of over here. Mana pile, yep, Chrome Mox, Lotus Petal, Mox Jet, Dark Ritual, Demonic Consultation, second Black Lotus, and then Black Lotus itself. This pile, well, really, these 2 cards, Demonic Consultation and Black Lotus, I think are some of the defining cards of this deck. I think they allow this deck to actually function at a high enough level to be competitive. And I do think this deck's competitive. I think it's solidly tier 2, but I think it's very competitive. I think it just ranches combo decks. I think it just ranches most control decks. Where does it struggle? It struggles against other pure aggressive builds. I do think it can beat mono white Death and Taxes. I do not think it can beat White Weenie. So like the difference being like Death and Taxes has more fringe creatures that are more hateful, but they're generally speaking less good in combat than White Weenie creatures are. I think this deck struggles with red decks pretty badly, like red aggressive decks. Medium red I think is actually a better matchup than like red deck wins. I think red deck wins is actually harder. I think it struggles with Jeskai, but Jeskai has the red cards that we tend to worry about, like the efficient burn spells and the 2-for-1 burn spells, because we're playing so many small creatures. Even though some of them have, recursive capability, like, early 2-for-1 burn spells like Forked Bolt, Arc Trail, Fire Ice, Electrolyze are not great for this deck. Those tend to still be a pretty massive tempo swing, especially if you're using like Dark Ritual and Lotus to play out numerous threats on turn 1, and you're expecting that investment of multiple cards to get early board advantage is going to at least provide you somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 12 damage. When it doesn't and it just gets washed away by a Forked Bolt, it's a massive tempo swing, and you're probably down on a lot of resources to be able to try to get the job done. But against a lot of other things, it's pretty good. Like, it's great against green decks, I think. It's great against blue decks. I think it's fine against like big white decks, white aggressive decks, not as much. Like pod decks, I think it's actually pretty decent against. Value mid-range, I think it's okay. But the more red and white a deck gets, probably the harder the matchup is going to tend to be, which I think is what kind of gives it its tier 2 status and probably its 70-30 matchup kind of results. Probably like a near 50-50 split versus mid-range. Probably near unlosable versus, control combo, density-based hard combo, if you will. And then, the 30 part of the 70-30 deck is the aggro matchups. Just not very good against aggro decks. And then certain shades of mid-range are also tough for it to beat. So in this slot right here, you have all of the Bobs. These are the card drawers that are also threats. I'm not playing stuff like Dark Tutelage, Phyrexian Arena, Necropotence. Those cards are just too slow. The deck really wants, anything that draws cards for it to actually be capable of also closing the game as well. And all of these cards do that. Rune Raider is a little body for 3 mana, but the fact that it just replaces itself right away, if you're playing at main 2 and just getting a draw step at the end step, is pretty big, and a 3-2 is still nothing to scoff at. Painseer, same thing. Like, this is a weaker creature. Like, for the deck, it's just a bear at the end of the day as far as damage goes. But if you connect with it once, or, you get down, where are you at, buddy? Smuggler's Copter. You can just tap this thing and get a free card, even the turn you cast it, or the turn after you cast it. Glintsleeve Siphoner, again, another slow Bob, but this one's actually pretty good in combat. The Menace is pretty big for the card, and gives it kind of evasion as well, so it can kind of go into the evasive pile as well. Dark Confidant, yeah, not many cards do it better as far as just drawing and also being an aggressive threat. Blood Scrivenger and Asylum Visitor, these are both drawers when you're Hellbent, except Asylum Visitor, I believe, 1 has Madness and 2 does it for both players, so if your opponent's Hellbent, you get to draw a card as well. You lose life on these, but that's fine. These cards still attack, and, you're getting a card for pretty nominal requirement, or pretty nominal sunk cost. You're playing a slightly suboptimal creature threat that can draw you cards, which is still good. This pile right here is the Reach and Burn pile. This pile is really relevant to how this deck works. All this cool tech and all this cool mana needs to be sunk into something that is not easily interactable with on the board outside of having spells. A lot of these creatures are very hard to block. Mutagenic Growth makes things hard to block, also kills people dead. It can be a shock if you need it to be. So I put the pulse trackers in this pile as well. Where are you at? This one. There's a lot of pulse trackers in the deck. Pulse trackers are actually pretty good in this deck. They don't attack for a ton. They're not good at fighting other creatures. But the fact that they can attack on the turn after your opponent's cast a bunch of relevant threats, they can attack and actually still pass damage through, even though they're trading, or even though they're chump attacking into a big creature. It's great because it means you get a little bit extra utility out of them, and they're very easy to cast. They're very easy to cast. They come down on turn 1. And they're generally going to chip in there for about 3 to 5 damage, somewhere in that range. Douthy Whore, not a great body, but it's very evasive. Shadow is good. Smuggler's Copter, this could go into this pile over here, which is the Ancient Tomb pile. This is like how we build equity in Ancient Tomb. But this is also just an evasive threat. It's also kind of a card engine. You'll see with some of the top cards that we have in here, they can jump between piles of what effect they have, and it kind of shows some of the interdeck synergy, the deck's ability to kind of jump between desired effect, to have the right densities and the right flexibilities of all effects over the course of numerous different draws the deck can have. Vampire Interloper, yep, just an evasive body. I thought about replacing this with the Eldrazi, the Devoid card that is a 2/1 flyer, also cannot block, but you can spend a colorless widget in 1 to have your opponent sacrifice a creature. I don't know on that. It's really 6 of one, half dozen the other. It's not strictly better. Because 1 is not black, which means that you cannot, well, you can, but you lose utility on cards like Mogisa's Marauder. You also lose some utility on Shadow Alley Denizen as well. So I do think in general the Eldrazi is better than this Vampire Interloper, but it's not strictly better. The Interloper does have some added benefit to actually being a black card. And actually, it's not just that; those aren't the only ones. The other one is Soul Spike. It can also be pitched as Soul Spike. So the more you put colorless creatures in here, like you do colorless cards, really, the more utility you lose in some of the other cards that we've decided to include in the deck. So I do think it requires some consideration to playing a card that's on its face value worse than the Eldrazi 2/1 that can give you sack potential than a card like Interloper, which has greater synergy and opens up more options over the course of more draws in the deck. Doughty Slayer, yeah, card is just unblockable. Attacks every turn, but that's what our deck's doing. Relentless Dead, also evasive. This card just has a ton of words on it. It's so pushed. It's hard to kill. It can give you value if you're in the mid to late game and you have a lot of extra mana. And it's just hard to block. It's evasive, so the card is very good. Tyrant's Choice. This is one of 4 burn spells essentially in this deck. I have not gone to Bump in the Night. All my burn spells basically do 4+ damage. 2 mana for 4 damage is a significant bit, though, and this card has just been a rock star. Mogis Marauder, this card just kills people dead. This is the card that is required with Black Lotus on turn 1 to get to this deck's turn 2 kill capabilities. Basically what it looks like is a turn 1 Black Lotus Dark Ritual, land, play Mogis Marauder in 3/1 drops, turn 2 draw Dark Triumph, sacking something, and attacking for lethal. That is how this deck wins on turn 2. But it's also just a good card to draw in the mid-game, late game even, to run right past a bunch of mid-range threats. It's evasive, it gives haste. Card's just good. It's not a very big body, but the fact that it makes your board relevant in the late game is really good. Plague Belcher, this card's just fine. It's a big body. It's 3 mana, 5/4. It does kill something when it comes in, or it makes itself a 3/2. But there's a lot of zombies in this deck. There's a lot of recursive creatures in this deck, and sometimes killing one of your recursive creatures just to get a big, evasive menace body down is really, really strong. Glintstleaf Siphoner, yep, already talked that card. It's evasive. Doughty Marauder. This card is not that impressive a body, but the fact that it's just unblockable basically kind of makes it like True Name Nemesis in this deck. Now, it's a True Name Nemesis that can be targeted, but if you get this down turn 1, it's still a fast clock. It's tough to block, so creature decks are going to tend to have issues with it. It's not blocking anything, but that's not really in this deck's repertoire. It's not looking to block. And it's just a cool old card. And it works really well with City of Traders and Ancient Tomb. That's another reason that I decided to add it, kind of one of the synergies with this card. Same with Plague Belcher. So I'm going to start moving some of these cards over so you can see some of the other inter-deck synergies. All of these cards are really easy to cast off of Ancient Tomb and City of Traders. You can even rationalize that the black 1 cards, like Vampire Interloper and Doughty Horror, if you have 2 swamps and a City or City of Traders and or a Tomb, are also very easy to cast. Geralf's Messenger, this is actually, I guess, not... It's burn. I put it in this pile because it's burn. It's not technically evasive, but this is a card that you don't generally want to block. It's going to already do 2 damage. If you block, it's probably going to trade with something. If it doesn't trade, it's going to come back and do 2. It's a great thing to sack to Dark Triumph. If you cast a Kiravax Spite and this thing blows up, it comes back and does 2 more, so it can do 7 damage with Kiravax Spite, which is pretty sweet. It's just a really powerful 3 mana black spell. Master of the Feast, evasive, huge. You cast this guy with the expectation that you're going to give your opponent 1 card and they're just going to be dead. The card is given to your opponent on their upkeep, so if they're playing a mid-range deck or a deck that doesn't have a ton of instant speed ways to interact, just like other creature decks, you're fine casting this out. If it's going to kill them in the air on turn 3, who cares? Just cast it, let them get the value off of it during your upkeep, and then attack them and kill them. This card's actually not bad versus elves, Craterhoof, which tends to be kind of a coin-tossy matchup because I'm not playing a ton of removal in this deck. There is just I'd say the amount of removal is the right size of removal. But that matchup's really interesting. It's really die rolly because if you win the die roll, like more often times than not, like they're put into forced block situations, and a card like this just can't be forced blocked, so it just kills them. Spawn of Mayhem. This is typically a 3-mana spell in this deck, not a 4-mana spell. Although I have cast it off Ancient Tomb and 2 Swamps before. This card just gets big really fast. It does a lot of damage. Just a really strong card. I mean, 4/4 trample flying with basically cost 3 with Spectacle, 2 black and 1. And also domes everyone every turn. If you're below 10 life, this thing gets a +1/+1 counter, so it's pretty ridiculous. Careback Spite. This card I initially put in for meme quality and or meme capabilities, and then I realized like, hey, this card's actually really good in this deck. Like, it's actually killing a lot of people, and it's killed I think 23 or 24 folks. Now I have to check my list, but it's killed a lot of folks. I've killed a lot of folks with this card. It tends to become relevant, and it's actually a very strong burn spell. It's a strong finisher, and the reason that like I think it actually is stronger than you would expect it to be, is that the decks that can interact with a card like Carevac Spite on the stack are not the sort of decks that can sit around and also wait to interact with Carevac Spite on the stack. What I mean by that is if you have, 2/2 drops on turn 1 or, heaven forbid, 4/1 drops on turn 1, something like that, like a blue opponent can't just sit there and try to leave up negates and counter spells and remands. Like, they can't do it. If they do, they're just dead. And you're not going to cast this thing if you just have them obviously dead on board. But the time that they do tap out for the Wrath of God and they're at 4 life or something like that, then you could just go ahead and just cast this thing. A couple cool things about Carevac Spite. I've never been blown out on Carevac Spite. I've killed 23 folks with it. I've never been blown out on it in this format. And part of that's because I also just don't play it, like a goofball. Like, I'm not going to cast it if I don't have to because I don't, just want to lose. But I think, honestly, this card's right where it wants to be, but there's a couple cool things with it, too. Like, so you have, like, cards like Scrap Heap Scrounger and these recursive cards. You have to, like, really read Carevac Spite to realize that there are certain resources that you don't lose, right? So, you lose your hand, you lose your board, but what you don't lose is floating mana. So, if you can float mana, well, there's two things. Actually, you don't lose floating mana, and you don't lose any spell that's already on the stack. So, one of the other cool things about this card is that you can cast a 2-drop, let's say, and then cast a Carevac Spite, in response to the cast of your 2-drop, and your 2-drop will still resolve after the Carevac Spite's resolved, rain or shine on the results of its resolution. So Carevac Spite does actually have some tricks to it. You have recursive things like Scrap Heap Scrounger, Despoilers. You can bring these things back with the floating mana that you have after you've done it. I've actually, I think, cast a Phyrexian Negator underneath a Carevac Spite, but the Spite resolved, so I won anyways. There's quite a few cards like that in the deck where you just, get them back. Or, you have cards like not Blood Scrivenger, a Silent Visitor, where it has Madness, so if it's in your hand, you can cast it off the mana that you still have floating when you discard it. Or, like, Geralf's Messenger, and come back and just do 2 more damage and get them with it. So overall, pretty cool. I mean, this card is really sweet for starters. It's just it seems like it's a very all-in card, and it kind of is, but it's also very powerful if you're using it in the right strategy where it's going to be very difficult for a deck that has a high volume of stack interaction to really interact with it, due to the fact that the board is so overwhelming that they just have to deal with the board. Dark Triumph. This card is kind of similar to Carevac Spite. Honestly, it probably does more damage on average than Carevac Spite does. This card just slaps. It's typically going to do somewhere between 6 to 10 damage. 8's probably a good average for it. But it just kills folks dead. They put down a Worm Coil Engine, you attack into it. Whatever they block with the Worm Coil Engine ends up being the patsy for the Dark Triumph. Everything else just smacks for a bazillion. And they die. Like, this card is just ridiculous. It just... I've never seen this card played in Highlander, and I was kind of shocked. Honestly, I forgot this card existed in the first couple builds of it. And then I was like, man, this card really just gets there. Really just does a lot of work. So I've been very happy with this include. Soul Spike, yep, just 4 mana or 4 damage burn for free. It's a 7 mana spell. Drawing off a Bob kind of sucks, but you can get 4 of that life back if you take 7 off of it. This is a Drain 4. It's 4 damage to any target, gain 4 life. You have to exile 2 black cards from your hand rather than play this spell's cost. But it doesn't matter if you 3-for-1 yourself if you're winning the game. Cards don't matter if the game's over, is basically kind of what it is at the end of the day. This next pile is the Disruption pile. Yep, Wasteland, yep. Hope of Gearper. This card is castable off Tomb and City of Traders, which is kind of another interesting synergy. This card's very powerful. I've used it to kill Storm decks or buy a turn against Storm decks. It kind of helps you negate the loss of the play against those style of decks. High Tide, I've used this card to beat High Tide before, which was also great. Deathrite Shaman. This is kind of a disruption card, kind of a burn card, kind of a utility card. It makes mana sometimes. Deathrite Shaman is just really good against like Delve decks, against like Loam. It's pretty good. It's just got a lot of different things it can do. I basically was just like, hey, is this card generally going to be a 2-power attacker in this deck? Yeah, it is. Like, it kind of is. And it also has an added utility. So I was like, yeah, it's a pretty free ad. Thoughtseizes, yep. Inquisition, Duress, yep. Phyrexian Revoker, this is Disruption, but it could also go into the Tomb and City of Traders pile. And the reason I'm kind of showcasing like what is more easily castable off City of Traders and Ancient Tomb is to show you that a lot of these cards kind of like spiderweb into synergies with other card choices that are in the deck. Well, they may not have like true synergies, like, the mana is set up in a way that you have a large flexibility of what it is you're able to cast on early turns in the game. Phyrexian Revoker is great disruption. It stops Black Lotus, it stops mana abilities, so this thing's pretty powerful against like the combo style decks. I can't sing Phyrexian Revoker's praises enough. The fact that it's colorless is just amazing. Hex Mage, yep, this card slaps pretty hard. Get walkers. I have used it to get a significant amount of things. I played against like Proliferate decks, where it was great. There's just quite a few different things you can do with it that I think makes it pretty good. So I've just been happy with it. It's been pretty good. It's also a first striker. It's a decent body for the mana. Witcher Orb. But this card just houses control. Tends to house the land style decks that are using like fast spawn to try to get ahead. If they use their mana, well, they're still... Basically, this can negate the effects of like the Loam engine because they're still basically stuck down to one land a turn. Now, they can have more explosive draws where like they're able to get a lot of lands out, but once they use them, they're back down to one. It just slows down the game a significant bit. Another card that could be considered disruption against like Loam-style decks is Ankh of Mishra. Because this deck's very mana light and is using artifact mana and rituals to kind of is the basis of its power, Ankh tends to be really good. If this card against fetch lands is a straight up Karavak Spite, it's 5 damage if you pop a fetch land against this card. If you find a shock, it's straight up 7 damage. So Ankh is just very, very good. It's just a ton of damage, kind of seemingly out of nowhere. And if you get this thing early against a more landed deck, it can just utterly ranch them. Kitesail Freebooter, not a great body, but this card is just too powerful not to run. Collective Brutality, yep, just very flexible, kills things on the board to open up attacking lanes, can drain them if you just need to get the last 2 points in. If they're a combo deck, you can take their most important instant or sorcery. Card is just great. Stuff out. Just basically free removal. Your life total doesn't matter that much as a resource in this deck. Just gets rid of almost anything except for black cards. Dismember, very cheap. Fatal Push, very cheap. Mardu Skull Hunter, this card is hilarious. It's not going to get point. It's not point to discard, but it's a good body for the rate. It's a fine body for the rate. It's not a good body, but it's a fine body. It's a body that is acceptable in this deck because it promotes the primary game plan of beating them down. But it also gets one card out of their hand, which against some decks, like it's not. It's a good exchange to have a slightly worse body that can actually get cards out of their hand. This last pile here is kind of the stuff that synergizes best with City of Traders and Ancient Tomb, although there are some other cards that I've been discussing throughout the deck tech. City of Traders and Ancient Tomb are highly powerful, and what I was trying to do with this most current build of Suicide Black is trying to test and really see if there was some medium or middle ground between the medium style builds that use Soul Ring and Mana Crypt splits and the most aggressive versions of now medium decks like Red Deck Wins, where basically you have a medium build, like a small medium build, that is opposed to like using high impact 4s and 5s, you can use high impact 3s that have 2 colorless cost inside their requirement, and or have high upside if cast for 4 mana, i.e. Pitiless Horde and Mardu Strike Leader. And I think I've been pretty successful in finding that that's actually a thing. I think there is middle ground between the medium decks and like small aggressive decks. But I think you do gain a little bit of the attributes of both decks. One, you have more powerful nut draws. Maybe not as powerful as like the medium style decks, but you also have more consistent median draws. So basically, you get the middle ground between consistency that the most aggressive decks in the format have, and the nut draw potential of the medium style builds of those aggressive decks with the tombs. So I've been very happy with these includes. You have Ambit Eternal still. This card has not changed. It's still in there. It's just a big dude. Pitiless Horde. This card's a new ad. It's a 5/3 with dash for 4. You can haste it in, and it does 5 damage to them, or they have to block it. It kills something. If you keep it around, it does 2 damage to you on your upkeep. That's fine though. It's a big body for 3 mana. It's worth the damage. Murder Strike Leader. This card I am still playing with. This card's fine. It gets better with cards like Dark Triumph. It's if you dash it in, it's a 3 power haster. The fact that it makes a warrior is pretty cool. It does not attack the turn it comes in, which means it's a little bit less good than certain white and red cards that do similar things. But it's still very powerful, and I've been pretty happy with it. Priest of Gix. So Priest of Gix is a really interesting include. I've had folks question this card. This card's sweet because it's basically a free 2 power attacker, which could mean the entire difference of a turn cycle. The other really cool thing is with Ancient Tomb, if you have like an Ancient Tomb and a Lotus Petal on turn 1, you cast out your Priest of Gix, and then you just dump 3 1-drops out. And that's just 8 power on turn 1. Like, this card fixes mana with the Tomb and with the City of Traders. And I've been really happy with how Priest of Gix is played out. It's not a big body, but it makes it's mana neutral, and it actually fixes mana in the deck. Phyrexian Negator. Yep, this card looks suspect. It probably is a little suspect. I've beat medium red with this card. This card is huge, right? Like, folks look at this card and they're like, oh, it's just a worse Obliterator. Well, really, Obliterator is just a better Negator, because Negator came first. But let's not discount this card entirely, right? Like, I do think this card has some upside to it over a card like Phyrexian Obliterator. One, it's very easy. It's easier to cast. It's far easier to turn 1 this card than it is to turn 1 a Phyrexian Obliterator. Phyrexian Obliterator is tough to turn 3. This card is very easy to get out on turn 1 or 2. I would say, like, very easy to get out on turn 2 in this deck, and very possible to get out on turn 1. Oftentimes, though, you kind of treat Negator like Sira Avenger in this deck. Not that you can't cast it early, but you generally want to wait until they've expended their removal on your smaller critters, and you know that Negator is going to trade with creatures and or hit them in the brisket. When you get to a certain point in the game, you don't really give a shit about your lands, so you can just start sacking lands, and it's not a big deal because this thing pushes so much damage so fast for such a small rate that it tends to be just fine. Like I said, I've killed medium red with this card. It's just big for not a lot of mana put in. The downside is huge, but I do think it's a manageable downside in this build of this deck. Doughty Marauder, we already talked about this evasive card. It's just very easy to cast off of tombs, so I like it. Plague Belcher talked about it. Mogis Marauder talked about it. Grafted War Gear off of the tombs. Just very, very good. Just a beating. Once you get it on board, it just continues to do its job. Ankh, yep, talked about it. Just a ranching against certain decks. Against fetch lands, like, this is just a house. Like, 5 damage for fetch lands, just ridiculous. Copter, yep, talked about it. Kind of a card engine. Porcelain Legionnaire, again, like, sometimes you just play on a turn 1 tomb and just drop this thing. It's a good body for the rate. So, guys, that is the build. It has undergone some changes. I would call it kind of like medium black, medium suicide black now. It's not quite medium. It's not quite all-in aggressive, but it has the consistencies. It has the power. I think it has the increased power, or merging on the increased power of like the medium builds, while also having the consistency of a more pure aggressive deck. I do think this deck is getting closer and closer to being like almost a pure aggro control strategy. Dark Triumph and Caravac Spite definitely do give you some aggro combo. I'm sorry, not aggro control, aggro combo. Dark Triumph and Caravac Spite definitely do give you some aggro combo style finishes, as well as Soul Spike. The deck does have the possibility to turn 2. I have done builds where I went up to 26 lands, ran a Mox Diamond and both Spirit Guides, and tested out Hatred. And that deck was less consistent. It still worked fine, but it was basically killing at the same rate. The one finding I did have is that this deck may actually want to try to test in this build with the Spirit Guides. The Spirit Guides were really good. I was actually really impressed with them, despite, I think a more traditional mindset to building aggressive decks is that your cards all matter and you don't want to waste your cards on slots like, Simian Spirit Guide or Elvish Spirit Guide or Lotus Petal. But I think the faster and the more degenerate the format gets, the more that becomes acceptable, because in order to keep pace with the format, you need to have the ability to basically mitigate losing the die roll. That's kind of like why I'm starting to like Lotus Petal more and more in aggressive decks or in aggressive control decks, because if you don't win the die roll, like, it gives you much higher ounce to playing a game where you're essentially on the draw, where you're forcing them to react to you. Either play multiple ones on turn one or play like a Thalia on turn one, whatever it may be. Not in this deck, but in, like, for instance, Death and Taxes in that case. So anyways, guys, that is the deck. I'm going to go on a quick pause. I'm not going to talk through the sideboard right now. There's some stuff we could talk through in there. It's mostly discard. Like Drill Bit, I think, probably needs to get in. Forsaken Waste is another card I'm considering. Unmask, I think, in certain metas is great. But this is the deck, guys. I'm going to go on a quick pause, and then I will cover some gameplay with the deck. Be right back at you. Alrighty, guys, we are back. And this is a great opening hand. It's got a turn 1 Lotus, and or turn 2 Lotus. Could be turn 2 Lotus because of City of Traders. We'll get it turn 1 and then play it turn 2. Opponent has Mana Crypt plus Force, but does nothing else, which is kind of suspicious to me because they could take damage off that Crypt, but they may not want it discarded. Unfortunately, I cast them on a Consultation and go down to 2 cards, so I'm going to have a very tough time winning this game. I don't take a look through my Exiled Zone. It would take too long to do that. Like, it wouldn't take too long, but it wasn't worth the expensive energy, to be honest. If my top 2 cards are, Tyrant's Choice, or Karavak's Spite, I can possibly win. I know one of them is Grafted War Gear. So what I'm doing here is just hitting them for a bunch of damage. They do block. They do block here. I go ahead and cast out the Plague Belcher, sacking the Tormented Hero, which means I'll probably be able to pass 5 damage next turn. I'm hoping that the Crypt will dome them this turn, but unfortunately they win the flip. So what I can try to do here, like, now I'm kind of in a spot where I don't think I can win. They untap with Nissa. Now, if we were playing a game where I wasn't afraid of milling, I would just kill the Nissa here pretty much outright, and I think the game would be pretty firmly, I'd be pretty firmly winning the game. I dome them down to 8. I'm on 0 at this point, so I'm just seeing cards in their deck. They do get domed by their Mana Crypt. Untap some lands. I think they cast, like, some massive thing. But none of this probably would have been happening. They cast Elder Scale Worm. None of this would have been happening if I had killed the Nissa. Like, in a standard game, I would have just killed the Nissa with one of the attackers, probably the Plague Belcher, and then hit them for 4, and they'd be at more life, but they wouldn't have an untapper down for mana. But we die here because we Demonic Consulted, went down to 2 cards in deck, and both of them are swamps. That all said, I mean, I think the deck did the deck did what it was intended to do, but just went too low to find the Black Lotus off Consultation. I think this is a fun game to kind of showcase, because the card Demonic Consultation does have some downside, but as you can see, it's a pretty low probability. Like, if that had been 3 or 4 cards, as opposed to 2, like, I would have been in a great spot in this game. I probably would have won this game, because the Elder Scale Worm would not have been castable, the Nissa would have been dead, but basically what I needed was 1 to 2 more attack steps to actually lock this game up. It would have been fine. So basically, if it wasn't in the bottom 2 or the top 6, I'd probably win. I mean, that's still hard to say without knowing their hand, but, seeing as how, like, they basically had to cast the Nissa, had to untap to try to keep it alive, and then on the following turn, after another untap, they were able to get the Elder Scale Worm down. It seems like their hand was probably a little bit more clunky. But it worked out because we could not attack the Nissa and beat the clock of milling to our own deck. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back for the next game in this match. Alrighty, guys, back. Yeah, the hand was not keepable. This hand's not keepable. This is a mull to 5. This hand's not great. There was a 2-drop on top. I put the 2-drop on the bottom. I already have a 2-drop. And what this hand wants, so, like, I'm already on 5 cards. Let me go on a quick pause. I'm already on 5 cards here. I'm playing against a less so I'm almost in the mirror, right? Like, but in different ways. My opponent's deck is like a big channel, big mana, like Eldrazi, just big dumb green stuff, but it's not like a Crater Hoof deck. So my deck and my opponent's deck are kind of doing something fairly similar, but in different parts in the game. My opponent is just going to have one big turn on the turn they try to kill me or the turn they try to overwhelm me. I'd like to have one big turn very early and then just ride that one big turn to victory. It's kind of how my deck's set up. Both decks play to variance to a certain extent, but I think in general, mine's going to have a more consistent game plan because it involves less requirement-intensive cards. That said, this hand that I have is kind of playing a slightly different game plan than I normally play with this deck. Because I'm so low on resources, what my game plan is here is to bottom the 2-drop that I have on top, which is Porcelain Legionnaire, so I can get a Doughty Slayer down, and then try to, as rapidly as possible, hit my next mana source, so I can get a Spawn of Mayhem down. Spawn of Mayhem is a very fast clock, and is going to make it very difficult for my opponent to race. And so I really want that third land. So they get another land off the 3 visits here. I get a Mutagenic Growth. I just go ahead and Collective Brutality this. I think I make a play here. I think it was actually correct. I don't know if it was correct, but I think it may have been correct to actually pitch the Diregraph Ghoul to do 2 damage to them here. Because if I draw the land, which I do, which is the optimal line, I just play out the Spawn of Mayhem, and then my mana is going to be fairly tight. Opponent, I believe, ends up playing a Worm Coil Engine here. So this is like looking like probably game over, right? Draw to Pitiless Horde. Pitiless Horde is actually really relevant here because it's going to do 2 damage to me on my upkeep. I really actually want to take 2 damage so that my Spawn of Mayhem can get bigger. So they're at 9, back up to 15 with the attack step. I take 2 off the Pitiless Horde first, then take the 1 off of Spawn, going down to 10. Spawn becomes a 5/5. The Pitiless Horde's a 5/3, and then I have the Doughty Slayer. I think Nash had to block here, but if they had, they would have lost their wall. But it also, if I have Mutagenic Growth, they just die. I wouldn't obviously Mutagenic Growth here if they just blocked the wall. On the Pitiless Horde, because this actually would kill me. Like, I'm at 8 right now, take 6 down to 2, take 2 off the Pitiless Horde, upkeep plus 1, which is dead, plus 1 off of the Spawn. If I don't Mutagenic Growth, I stay at 10 life, I get hit by the Worm Coil Engine down to 4, take 2 off Pitiless Horde down to 2, plus 1 off Spawn down to 1. So he leaves me alive at 1 with 1 less blocker on board, but if they draw a creature, they could still be in a good spot. It also puts them back up to 5 life, plus 6 to 11. My backswing, if they attack on the following turn, my backswing would be 6 in the air, plus 1 off of Spawn of Mayhem, plus Pitiless Horde, which requires blocking, and 2 off of the Doughty Slayer, which is 9 damage, so 2 over what they'd be able to gain if they attack with the Worm Coil Engine on the following turn. So, kind of an interesting game. This is a mull of 5, and we were still able to actually race a Worm Coil Engine with, a black aggressive deck. This is one of the games that actually, honestly, like, I always like kind of talk crap on this deck, but I was actually kind of amazed at this game. I was like, I was kind of proud of the deck after this game too. I was like, like a lot of folks talk crap on like the quality of a lot of these cards, but the fact that they can race a Worm Coil Engine with an opponent on 16 life is kind of amazing to me. It's like, like why not? Why can't I race a Worm Coil Engine? And being able to do that, I think says a lot about the deck too. It's like, this deck, is not bad. It's pretty good. It's a good tier 2 deck. But anyways, you get to kind of see that here. I was amazed that I actually won this game. The Pitiless Horde was a great draw because the life loss on it, losing that 2 life was really relevant because I needed to get this Spawn of Mayhem to be bigger on the next turn and the turn after that as well. If I'd only been able to go to 13, I think I would have probably lost this game. But, as it stood, we got lucky, and we were able to pump up the Spawn of Mayhem on the turn cycle that we needed to ensure that 2 turns down the road we could have won. Now, I did not expect to win this turn. I think Nash should have blocked with the Wall of Roots, and then hope to draw a creature, because they can't just stay back and block anymore. I'll just attack with my Flyer and my Evader, but I think they needed to save the life, to be honest. As it turned out, I had the card to punish it, Mutagenic Growth as well. But very, very cool game, and had fun playing it. Anyways, quick pause, guys. I'll be back momentarily for the next game in this match set. Alrighty, guys, back. This hand's fine. It's got a curve. It's got 2 lands. Like, I'm generally loath to throw these kind of hands back. Draw into a Wasteland. Play on a 2/1 on turn 1. Loud and proud. Opponent plays on an Eldrazi Temple, and then Sylvan Scryings for Ancient Tomb. What's going through my head is we're going to get Eldrazi Smashered, or Eldrazi, Reality Smashered, or Thought Not Seared. Or like World Breaker or something like that. The reason that I just so this is an interesting line of play. So the reason that I auto Wasteland them is because I actually want them to have to use Ancient Tomb to cast their spells. because that's going to just provide me with value, and it's going to up my clock by a significant bit. The other complementary piece to that is I drew into a Sarcomancy, which is a great draw for that turn because it's a one-drop that I can play. It applies pressure, and it also allows me to wasteland and not feel bad about having to wasteland because I'm not playing a follow-on threat. If I hadn't drawn that Sarcomancy, I don't know if I would have just wastelanded there just to play out, a threat, because I do need to progress my primary game plan in this game. But I also think that Eldrazi Temple plus Ancient Tomb is very dangerous. Whereas, even if they do get to mana to cast out whatever card they have that is good with Eldrazi Temple and Ancient Tomb, I think Ancient Tomb is going to do enough work for me that it's going to help me to win the game. As it turns out, it was the right line because they don't have a follow-on land other than Ancient Tomb, and they don't do anything on their turns. They have a bunch of probably big, hard-to-cast spells. They also have Eye of Ugin, which is pretty big. And Tireless Tracker. But Tireless Tracker is going to be put into a spot where it's forced to block here, unless they want to take 6. And if they take 6, I think I'm happy with that, because then I can probably just get them with Karavak's Spite. So they're dead to Spite next turn if they don't destroy my mana. Unfortunately, here they have World Breaker, but they're taking a bunch of damage off of tapping their Ancient Tomb again. They get one of my lands, they exile it, and now Spite is out of the question. I go ahead and draw, trying to find a land, because if I find any land, I just win on this turn. Unfortunately, I kind of miss on lands here, but because I have 2 evasive creatures, 2 menace creatures, I can just attack with impunity and put them down to 2, which turns off their Ancient Tomb, which means effectively they're at 3 mana, although they just got a little bit more from the Arbor Elf, and now they're just dead. So attacking with all my creatures, and they go to -6. So, that was against Eldrazi Green. I don't think the matchup's that bad for SUI. I think it's interesting, right? Like, if we stumble at all on mana, then it can be kind of a tougher matchup. But oftentimes, you put them into spots really fast where they're forced to trade their early mana dorks, or if you have, 1 to 2 pieces of disruption or disruptive creatures or evasive creatures, you can just push through for enough damage just to win the game. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for the next game. Alrighty, guys, here's another game. We're playing against, I believe, 4-color control, like Brea control. This is essentially a one-lander. I mean, I'm keeping this because I have a Wasteland. They suspended Ancestral Vision. I'm not worried about that. That card is good, but it's not really great in this matchup. This hand would have probably been a lot less keepable if I did not have the Glintsleeve Siphoner. There's a good chance that I can get blown out by Fire Ice next turn or Arc Trail, depending on if they're running them. They're probably running Fire Ice. Arc Trail's a little more techy. They Lightning Bolt and discard my my Rune Raider. I go ahead and blow up their red source. I think red tends to be one of the harder colors for this deck to beat. And they're on a multicolor. They're on a 4-color deck, so their mana is a lot more relevant than my mana is. Play around Daze here. Jump in for 6. Tell them, hey, draw a Terminus or a Toxic Deluge or something, and they don't have it, evidently, and we just get them. Quick pause, guys. We'll be right back. All right, guys, back. Yeah, this hand's just fine. It's got a 1-drop. It's got a 2-drop. If it draws into a 3rd mana source, you can play Priest of Gix, maybe another 1-drop if we draw into one. Hand's good. Another 1-drop is fine. I'm not planning on blocking against this deck very much, so I feel pretty good about this. Opponent Chain Lightnings this card right away. That's cool. Spawn of Mayhem's pretty sweet, so if we draw another land now, we can attack with whatever we're going to play, which is a Kitesail Freebooter this turn, into Priest of Gix plus Spawn of Mayhem, which is strong. See their hand, there are no spells in their hand, which is kind of shocking because their deck is mostly spells. Their hand's going to be really tough to beat, though, because it's got a lot of good creatures in it. It's got a Resto Angel, they find an Ancestral Recall. It's got Brea, which is really strong. Luckily, I have another 1-drop threat, so I'm able to get rid of this Ancestral. I still think I'm going to have a very tough time beating this hand because it has the Restoration Angel plus the Brea. And we know they have mana to cast all their spells. I attack here. I know that I am likely to, at a minimum, get my 2/2 eaten. But I think the only way I win this is by them not blocking one of these 2 threats, getting some damage in, basically them misplaying. I think they should have blocked both. Being able to put down 6 power. The issue is they drew a Lightning Helix, and they have a Brea, which means that 1 power plus the 1 power from one of the Thopters plus the Helix will be able to kill my Spawn of Mayhem, which means my attacks are still a little bit dubious. I go to attack here because I figure I'm going to be able to use this mutagenic growth I just drew to kind of blow them out a little bit. I do. I just play on another evasive threat. They're going to start bouncing their Brea and make it almost impossible to attack them. Without the Caracas, I think I still have a good shot at winning this game. But, yeah, they kill that with the 2 mana. The Brea, having the Caracas combo with it, is pretty unbeatable. It's pretty close to unbeatable. I'm going to attack with all. It's not a phenomenal attack, but it's going to pass some damage and allow me to get another threat down, put them to 12. I essentially have them hit for 4 more damage here. I go ahead and pack it in. I guess I know they have Helix in hand, so I know I'm not winning this. If I knew they didn't have Helix, I could put them down to 8, and that means somewhere I have to find 3 damage, and I can hit a Spite and maybe win. But it's the Brea with Caracas is just too much value and too much life gain for me to really get through, so I end up losing this one. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Hand's great. It's got a turn 1 Lotus and a Mox, so it's going to cast a lot of things and stuff. It's going to cast, a lot. I opt for a more conservative line here. I don't think I needed to find Lotus, I guess. And I'm going to cast out all my stuff by turn 2 anyways against a 4-color deck that's going to have less consistent mana, so I think it's still fine. I could have seen another line being like just cast out Demonic Consult for Lotus on turn 1 and just winning with it. But I think what the consideration that I went through here is that I can actually save Consult and actually just find Kaervek Spite and win a whole turn cycle faster. And if their plan is to just kill my stuff, then that's still pretty good. What I end up doing is because they use their mana during combat, I go and find Spawn of Mayhem, play on Spawn of Mayhem so I can start chipping in with a big 4/4 and doing 1 damage on upkeep. And say, hey, have a Supreme Verdict or Wrath of God, something like that. Kill my stuff or die to it. You cast a Nimble Obstructionist. I believe, just block the Death Touch Lifelinker. I start leaving lands in hand, and they pack it in. It's too powerful, or too fast, really. But speed is kind of power in some ways. Speed and consistency of speed is power. That's kind of what the deck showcased here against a blue X control deck, which I think tends to be a good matchup for Suicide Black in general. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for more gameplay. All right, guys, one more blue matchup. Just kind of showcase what this deck does against blue. This is a great hand against a player that generally plays blue control decks. It has all 1-drops. Well, it has a 2-drop and a bazillion 1-drops. I'm definitely going to go 2 1-drops next turn in case they're running counter magic. Then on the following turn, I'll go 1-drop plus 2-drop. And sorry for calling the Porcelain Legionnaire a 2-drop, but in this deck it is always a 2-drop. I guess outside of Black Lotus, I guess you could make white off Lotus and cast it for its hard cost. So just too fast is what it is at the end of the day. I believe my opponent's playing a bug kind of control, mid-range control deck. And this deck, I think, tends to be pretty good against the bug decks. Even good against bug Podwalks. I think it's pretty good against that as well. Tends to be more of a value deck, a little bit slower, and doesn't have as much board interaction. And yeah, you just get them. Anyways, pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily. Alright, guys, back. This hand is not bad. I'm going to probably exile the Belcher because it generally presents card disadvantage the turn it comes in. I don't have an assured 3rd mana, and I want to get on the board rapidly with a bunch of power. So I'm going to play out. I'm going to put the Belcher underneath it, and if I hit my next land, I already have a relevant 3 in the form of Grafted Wargear, which is probably just faster than Belcher anyways. Plague Belcher, I'm sorry. And we draw one of the best cards in our deck, but our opponent's playing a blue deck, so I'm not just going to throw it out there. I want to force them to react to my cards. I play out my 1-drop here because I kind of want them to counter it. If they counter it, I'll just play out the Relentless Dead or Grafted Wargear and get after them. I believe opponent goes for a Collective Brutality here. No, Spellseeker. Finding Brutality, I want to say. Yeah. They want to gain life and get after my hand. Because they're tapped out now, I'm just going to play out the Black Lotus, put into play the Grafted Wargear, play out a Shadow Weenie, and smack the living crap out of them. You can see here they discard Remand and Logic Knot to gain life and check out my hand. Their counter spells are basically rendered irrelevant because of the efficiency of my cards and because of the fact that I already have presentation of a very lethal and endangering threat on board. So those cards are just basically dead. Like, we basically just kill counter spells because we render them moot. They have to play on a Snapcaster here and block, not getting value off the Collective Brutality, play on a Graveyard Marshal, main 2. They draw for the turn, don't evidently find a Damnation, and we win the game. So, I covered 2 of these blue games. They're not the best of games because I think this deck is just overwhelmingly favored against them in general. But when you start getting into like more blue mid-rangey decks like Jeskai, like then that's where I think this deck starts to kind of trail off in regards to like the mid-range matchups against like more red and white based aggro controller mid-range decks. So anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for another game. Alrighty, guys, back. This hand's great. It's got, turn 1 Copter or turn 1 Porcelain Legionnaire. It's got a Caravac Spike to close out quickly. It's going to take a lot of damage, but that's alright. You get attacked for 1 by this Noblest of Hierarchs. Draw no Black Lotus, which, may be pretty strong. I can't remember if I play out the Lotus here or not. Honestly, it may have been more correct to just cast in the Porcelain Legionnaire off the Black Lotus, but I wanted to leave up options for Caravac Spite here. Opponent goes ahead and casts a Fire Covenant on my dudes. I go ahead and activate the Smuggler's Copter here. Discard their Rayhan. Last of the Abzan, I want to say. Draw into a Spawn of Mayhem. I'm actually looking for a swamp here. I want to kill them with the swamp. I don't find it. I'm kind of being... I don't know. Maybe I'm slow rolling here a little too much. Yeah, I probably am. I could have killed him this turn with Spite. Oh, actually, no, I couldn't have because of... No, I should have just hit him with the Spawn of Mayhem. That was stupid. I block here on the 8/8. Spawn of Mayhem puts him down to 4. I activate the Smuggler's Copter, attack for very lethal, what appears to be very lethal, and they go ahead and pack it in. Alright guys, quick pause, we'll be back momentarily for the next game against 4-color counters. Alright guys, we are back. Hand's fine. It's got 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, so it's kind of doing what Aggro expects to do. Draw to a Black Lotus, always welcome. I cannot block this thing. But I'm not really a blocking deck. Maybe I should have played Phage out. Carnophage, that is. Attack with all. Get in 4. The one cool thing I can do here is I can play out 2 1-drops. The Mana Gorger is going to get big, but I have this Vampire Hexmage, which actually is pretty good against Mana Gorger Hydra. I don't mind taking some damage in the early game, though. Like, they're down to 14. Like, I feel pretty good if they're casting all of this stuff out and having to attack me. I go ahead and trade here, play out the Hex Mage. One of the issues we're going to run into is the Scavenging Ooze is going to become a 4/4, and they're going to gain 2 life here. So it was kind of annoying. They go for 1 here, I assume. I forget what this is for. Maybe a Mana Dork? Yeah. So they attack in with this card. I go ahead and block with all this stuff. And they have a Blossoming Defense. So I just get Ranch here. This is just a blowout. That's pretty strong, But there's not much we could have done. I just go ahead and concede it. I'm dead. I'm not beating that. But pretty funny. Like, Blossoming Defense was one of the better cards they could have had there. Because if they did not have it, well, one, they probably wouldn't have attacked. I guess maybe I should have known, like, hey, they probably have it because they're attacking. But, I still think, like, if I get hit by this thing once, I'm still losing. So I think it's still worth the block there. And if it's a bluff, cool. It could also just be a Berserk, and they think that maybe I'm going to let it through so I can attack back, crack back. But I think there I was put in a spot where I had to box. I go to 6 here. I'm not winning the race with the cards that I have on board. I really need to make this thing small enough, trade with it, so that I can possibly win the race against Scavenging Ooze, which is a lot more blockable without Trample. Despite the fact that it
buys them a lot of time by gaining them life. So, rough spot either way this game, but, still a cool game. Very, very interesting. So, quick pause, guys. We'll be back for the last game in this match set against 4-color counters. Alright, guys, we're back. Hand's great. It's got numerous ones. It has some hand attack. It's got a good 3 that's a card engine. I can think of better hands, but this hand's fine. It operates. Play on a turn 1 mana dork. I think this turn I'm probably just going to attack, play a 1 drop out, and get their best 3 drop out of their hand. They play on a cavern. They attack me. This is really aggressive. I don't know. Maybe they had to, but I'll take this hit. This hit does not bother me. I'm going to play actually the Rune Raider out. They play out the Mana Gorger. I really think they want to start blocking with that Dread Horde. This guy right here. I think they're more mid-rangey than I am. I'm the aggressive deck. And right now I'm kind of growing this Mana Gorger large, but I kind of want to incentivize them attacking. And I draw into Kiravak's Spite. They know I have it, though, because Rune Raider reveals. They cast out an Umezawa's Jeet. They opt to attack here. They're at 5 right now, but they can go up to 9. I attack with all of my cards. They kill 2 of my things with Jit. And I hit them down to... They just die. I don't know. Yeah, I guess they were just dead anyway. They looked at it there. I could have killed with Spite there, but I did not. But pretty cool game. I think they possibly could have won it. I really do think the Dreadhorde Butcher, if it stayed back, probably makes this game a lot harder. I'm not saying I couldn't have won it, because I did draw Spite, but it would have been a lot tougher to win. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back for one more game with this deck, and then we'll call it. Alright, guys, back. I may do 2 more of these. I'm going to do another one with 4-color counters. This is actually a pretty funny set of games. This one has more spectacular results in it. This is a Dark Ritual hand with only 1 land, so we are hoping to draw into more lands, but we do have a card engine on turn 1. Glib Reaper typically plays 4-color counters, so I'm pretty sure that's probably what he's going to be playing here. Takes my removal spell, which is fine. I'd rather have it, but not having it's not going to kill me either. Draw to discard, see a Sylvan Library and all lands, and I'm like, oof. Oh, not all lands. They have a Finhorn Elf and an Incubation Druid. So their hand's very mana-rich, but not very action-heavy. Just play out the Dauthi Horror here. After having drawn a card off of the Glintsleeve Siphoner. Drain for 1 every turn because of Night Market Lookout. And got them down to 13, so they're not really in a great spot. They have drawn into a little bit of action. They drew a Belt Collector and a Garrus. But I'm able to actually lock them with Winter Orb right now. Not lock them, but they're going to have less mana resources on the following turn for anything they may draw. They're actually staying back with their cards, which is fine by me. It's very easy for my cards to continue to attack and get value. So I'll just get in there. And they debate attacking, but they don't. Because my deck races pretty well. And now I have 4 power unblockable, putting them down to 5, which means the following turn with Night Market Lookout attacking, I'm going to kill them. So they have to do something about the board here. They adapt the Incubation Druid, which isn't that big of a deal. It kind of is mana neutral. It's actually, I think, 1 mana down. And the game is over. So anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll go to the next game. This first one was a little more spectacular. And my opponent's keep was a little less strong against what I had going on. So quick pause. We'll be right back. Alrighty, guys, we're back. I believe this is a Spite game, so this is a Kiravak Spite game. So hand's great. It's got a Mox. It's got a couple good 2s. It's got now a Master of the Feast, which is a big boy, and it flies, which a lot of their deck does not fly. Play on a Graveyard Marshal first. It just attacks for more. They play out a Pollen Bright Druid. Draw to the Spite. So now I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, alright, I got to set up a Spite kill. In this case, the Pollen Bright Druid was better against my Gifted Aetherborn, or was worse against my Gifted Aetherborn. So, in retrospect, is results-oriented thinking, I would have rather probably played out the Gifted Aetherborn. But Aetherborn is going to trade over time a lot better than Graveyard Marshal is. And I assume my opponent's cards should be better than mine are. Alright, so I actually do an all-out attack here. Expecting that I'm going to trade with the Rayhan, make the Tireless Tracker huge, but get my opponent down to 12, and have the ability... So they have a 6-power attacker on the board. I also have a 5-power that I play this turn. I have 6 I can do next turn if they fetch, or take damage off anything, I can just kill them. They play out a Mistcutter. Pulse Tracker was great here. I attack with both. So I make an interesting line here. I actually opt to sack the Hope of Gearper. I want to play around stuff like Berserk and like Pump Spells. We know they have Blossoming Defense in their deck. And I'm at 18, but 18 is not unkillable with 8 power on the board, and likely playing Berserk or, Blossoming Defense. Also, Become Immense is a thing. Like, we could die from here is my point. I've got him at 6, so I'm not quite able to kill them on this turn with Karavak's Spite. But on the following turn, I'll be able to kill them in response to my attacker step, because I'll get a damage off of, or not my attacker step, but my trigger off my Pulse Tracker during attacker step. So I go ahead and do this. They cast out an Atarka's Command, which gives their stuff reach, which means they'll be able to fly my Master of the Feast. I cast Karavak's Spite in response. They did have the Berserk, so we were actually dead to their holdings if we had not sacked the Hope of Gearper. So I think it was a pretty solid heads-up play. But you're able to kind of see a cool Spite win on turn 6. A little bit slower of a win because we had a lot of interaction, a lot of trading on the board, but still pretty powerful. Get him to Xaxes with Spite. Pretty cool flourish for the win there. All right, guys, I'm going to pause it. I'm going to do one more game because I kind of did a run back of 4-color counters, mid-range counters, kind of Jund counters. But we'll do one more game with a different deck. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Playing in actually the finals of this last month's month end. I was kind of shocked to make it to this point because I think this deck is, like I was saying, I think this deck kind of needs to get a little bit more lucky in its matchups. I do think there's a larger representation of blue in the MTGO meta than is standard, so I think this deck's not horribly positioned, the Suicide Black deck I'm running. But this matchup, I know what this matchup is, because actually it was funny, like, I think 2 or 3 days, well, maybe it's a week prior, Croc was actually asking what deck he should run in this tournament, and I think Benjamin Wheeler, and I think I was like, yeah, playing Jeskai Midrange, it's the best deck. It's, in my opinion, one of the best decks, period, and it was a good deck for, I think, the expected metagame. I go ahead and play a turn 1 threat here. I believe it's just a Rakdos Cackler. Say go. This is not going to be a good matchup for me, and spoiler alert, I lose this game. So they Gitaxian Probe me. Playing the land before Gitaxian Probe, a little bit interesting. They have a Bolt, cool. I figured they probably did. Play on a Thornbow Archer, not great. They play out a Core Firewalker, not good for me. I just go ahead and cast out the Pitiless Horde. I could have raided it in there, and maybe I should have raided it in there. Maybe I should have. They, unfortunately, have a card I don't want to see, which is... Incinerate. I thought it was Lightning Helix. Either way, they have a 3-damage burn spell. So I take 2 and take a bunch of damage. I can't do anything that cool this turn. I can basically do 9 damage to them with burn in hand at the cost of my entire board. So I just play out a Knock of Mishra and hope that that's going to do a little bit of work. Stoneforge Mystic's a big oofta because that card is going to find Umezawa's Jitte, which is very difficult for my deck to interact with. I cast out a Doughty Slayer here, get an attack in for 1 off of the Thornbow Archer. They have an active Ancestral Vision going on right now. They get some counters on this thing, exchange it. I go ahead and dome them for 4. And just attack with my 2/2, trying to see if I can get them to remove counters from it. Unfortunately, 5 is not 10, so... and they have 2 counters as well. They go ahead and cast out a Chandra, kill my thing. I'm kind of just basically playing this game out right now. If my opponent doesn't misplay, I can't win this game. If my opponent misplays pretty badly, like I can probably still win this game, but it's not going to be easy. The fact they had to answer that was not Umezawa's Jitte for one of my creatures is kind of big because I'm trying to actually force them to use their counters to remove my creatures. But in general, by the time Umezawa's Jitte is capable of being locked up to numerous onboard threats versus this deck, if I'm not in a position where I'm winning on the very next turn, I'm probably going to lose. And I see my next draw, and it's not enough. I think what I was trying to draw to was something like along the lines of like Soul Spike. And even then, like, Soul Spike wouldn't have done it. I don't know. Like, I had to pretty much have drawn Soul Spike on the previous turn to have gotten there. Not very high out. So we end up losing this first one. Quick pause, guys, and I'll be right back for the second game. All right, guys, had to mulligan down to 6. So this is a 6 that I think you have to keep. The reason I say that is if it draws a land, it can cast all of its spells. It also has access to 4 mana on turn 2. I have 2 2-drop threats. So, and I also have a discard spell. So, this hand's really interesting. I think there's 2 ways you could play this hand. You can either play out turn 1 Demonic Consultation for Black Lotus and and keep the Lotus in hand and try to or actually no, I think I'd try to resolve the Lotus. Yeah, I'd resolve the Lotus. I wouldn't leave it in hand because I think it getting countered on turn 2 is more likely than it getting countered on turn 1. Or you can hand attack to try to get rid of any problematic counter magic or problematic burn spells that my opponent may have in hand. The line I take is this. You could also go turn 1 Swamp into Lotus, into turn 1 Threat, into Thoughtseize. I like that a lot less because I think it reduces your ability to 2-spell in a turn on following turns. Now, if I had a 1-drop plus a 2-drop and Demonic Consultation Swamp, I would never Thoughtseize on turn 1. I would just put all of my power on the board and then Thoughtseize them on turn 2. See a Negator, bottom Negator. Go ahead and cast Thoughtseize, see Forked Bolt, and take it. Now, this is an interesting hand. This hand is actually really... so, not to disparage Croc, but this hand's not good. This hand is not a good hand for this matchup. It is a Forked Bolt, a Treasure Cruise, which is going to be uncastable for like 4 to 5 turns, and all lands in 1 Strip Mine. Unfortunately for me, this hand's going to be pretty good against me if my opponent goes turn 1 Strip Mine, which they do. If I draw into a land this turn, I think my chances of winning are pretty high. If I don't, they go down considerably. So I draw into a Sarcomancy, which, as far as draws that are not lands go, it's not the worst, because it means that when I go for a Black Lotus off of this Demonic Consultation, which I do, I can put 4 power onto the board. So I put 4 power down. One of which is Bloodghast, which Bloodghast, you don't really want to kill with Burn, because if I draw a land, it just comes back. There was an argument playing out the Douthie Slayer there, but I think it's a pretty weak argument. Get my opponent down to 15 here, but still miss on lands, which is unfortunate. Opponent plays out a Geist of St. Traft. I don't think I have a choice. I think I have to continue to attack here. The reason that I think it's valid or it's correct to continue to attack is because it's not likely that my opponent's drawn both interaction and relevant threats to play on curve, given the hand they kept. Opponent basically says go here, which kind of makes sense. I assume at this point they have counter magic in hand. I draw into a land here, so I'm just going to attack. They play out a Vendilion Clique. So I have an interesting choice here. I actually just opt to cast the Soul Spike to get them down to 7 and gain 4, which nullifies their ability to race me with the Geist of St. Traft. They block here on the zombie token, which means I'm going to take an additional 1. Play on a land. Now, next turn they can Treasure Cruise. They drew into Arc Trail. So, unfortunately, the way this game played out, I think we get a little gypped in this game. Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from Croc as a player, because I think they played the cards they drew I think they played the cards that they had in their hand and the cards they drew very well, but I think their hand was utterly unkeepable. So I think every decision they made in play was just fine. I think it was good. I just think the hand they kept was pretty miserable in this matchup. The fact that it got there, sucks for me. Is great for them, and I think they played it well. But the likelihood of it playing out this way is very low. And the reason I say that is because every draw, not that Jeskai does not play these cards and can draw these cards, but it has to specifically draw threat, answer, threat. If it ever draws land, or land, threat, land, answer spell, then it's going to put Croc in a really bad spot against how he played this game. And does it stink to lose to this? Yeah, but we're also not playing the highest. We're playing a higher variance deck, but I do think that given the keep that they made, their draw steps worked out very fortunately for them to answer specifically every single thing we did, while still presenting a relevant threat to actually win the game. So at this point, we pretty much lost the game. They drew into the Arc Trail they needed to draw. They're going to be able to Treasure Cruise pretty much with impunity. Well, I have no pressure on board, and that's what happens. They TC here, rebuild their hand up 3 cards. Hit me for 6. I'm going to take 1 off Sarcomancy at this point, draw into Grafton War Gear. Doesn't do anything. And we are dead. So Jeskai mid-range I do think is a tougher matchup for Suicide Black. I do think in general Jeskai will beat it. However, I do think in this game we just got a little we got unlucky in drawing lands, and I think our opponent got very lucky in how they drew over the course of this game. So yeah, that's kind of how the finals ended with this. It's kind of a disappointing finish because I did feel like in this game specifically, I felt like I at least was going to force a game 3 out of it. But sometimes, it works out that way. And I do think Croc played their cards they had very well. I just don't think their cards are very keepable. Yeah. So anyways, you can obviously see here, this is a weakness of the deck. Like, if your opponent has multiple 2-for-1 removal spells backed up by efficient, uninteractive, and quick clocks, it can be very tough for the deck to beat. And, hitting the Geist when they needed to, hitting the 2-for-1 answer to my threats when they needed to, and really the strip mine in the opener, really kind of cemented their position in this one. So this deck did lose to it. I think the chances of us losing this game were pretty low. I think fairly low given what I saw of their opener. But it was definitely a way that the cards could have played out, and they did. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I think this is a really great Tier 2 deck. I think in general, it's going to ranch most blue control decks, most combo decks, most value-oriented mid-range decks. I think it's pretty close to a 50-50 matchup against a lot of other mid-range. It does not win aggressive matchups, and I think the more red and white a deck gets in the mid-range spectrum, the harder the matchup gets. But outside of those matchups, like I think, and actually Aristocrats is really horrible and Goblins is really horrible. But Goblins is basically red deck wins, but actually has more value lines in it. And Aristocrats is basically the reason that matchup is so tough for this deck is because this deck has a lot of 2-1s, and their deck has a lot of 1-1s that when they die they come back for more blockers that incidentally just randomly kill most of my threats in attacks, which means you're just going to lose card advantage too quickly and you're not going to be able to damage them quickly enough unless their mana just doesn't work out. But outside of like some of those key matchups where this deck just isn't expected to win, this deck could do really well if played well, I think. And I think the build's come a long ways and has kind of gotten very close to the roots of the deck, which is really a Dark Ritual aggro combo deck. And yes, we're 100 cards, we're not 60, and yes, we're only playing realistically. Actually, we probably are pretty close to having 4 rituals in the deck in a way, because we're playing Literal Ritual, Black Lotus, Consult, Lotus Petal, Chrome Mox, and Mox Jet, which gives us a lot of outs to drawing fast mana on turn 1 to be able to power down some early aggression. And throughout the course of these games, I hope you've been able to kind of see the power of the deck. Also in this last game here, kind of see some of the frailties of the deck, some of the cards that are really good against this deck. So you can make an informed decision about the qualities of the deck itself, which I think, I do think the deck does have some qualities that make it a decent choice in small field metagames. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's a deck that I'm pretty proud of where it's gotten to. I also think it showcases that, you can make some pretty significant sacrifices in card quality if the core engine of the deck is intact. And in this case, we're playing a Fair Lotus deck, and we have numerous ways of getting after a turn 1 ritual start. So I think the deck itself is fairly consistent in regards to that. Yeah. So guys, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it here. This is a kind of, I don't want to say my final build, but I'm probably going to leave off with Suicide Black for a little while and explore different pastures in Canadian Highlander deck building. Actually, I have been as of recent, but I want to close this out because, I have my respect for this deck has kind of grown. I still call it a dumpster fire of a deck, but it's really not. I think it's actually a fairly consistent deck. I think in general, the first time you look at this deck, you'll just think it's a dumpster fire.
because of some of the card inclusions. And because of, like, I guess to some extent the all-in nature of the deck, but it's really not that all-in. It has a lot of engine-style cards that allow you to recuperate on lost cards, and it has a lot of outs to having a lot of fast mana and strong nut draws on turn 1, which I think in general those attributes are going to make the deck consistent enough to be a pretty winning list. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Take care and enjoy.